All right, let's jump right into this month's CBRN World, shall we? August 2024 issue, and, well, it's like the news just can't help itself. Mpox is back. Again.
Yeah, and if I'm being honest, it's a bit like deja vu, isn't it? We go through this whole cycle, outbreak, panic, response. Everyone vows to be better prepared next time.
And yet, here we are. Same headlines, different year.
Rinse and repeat. Though, to be fair to the folks over at the World Health Organization, they're probably feeling less surprised and more, we told you so.
Oh, absolutely. And just in case anyone needs a quick refresher, because let's be real, it's been a minute we're talking fever, those distinctive lesions. And unfortunately, the latest reports from DRC are showing a mortality rate that's giving everyone pause. But the real kicker here, the thing CBRN World really hones in on, is that this isn't just about Mpox itself, it's about the bigger picture, the whole preparedness problem that keeps rearing its ugly head.
It's like we aced the pop quiz on Mpox back in 2022. Everyone crammed, we threw some quarantines and travel bans at it and managed to squeak by.
But the final exam, the one with the novel viruses and the bioengineered threats we can barely even imagine yet.
Yeah, that one's still looming, and we're nowhere near prepared.
So I'm genuinely curious, putting on your CBRD World Reader hat for a second, when you saw this Mpox news, what was your gut reaction? Surprise? Or that inevitable, here we go again feeling? And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because buried in all the Mpox headlines, CBRN World drops this truth bomb about, well, trust. Or the lack of it, which is kind of the bigger threat here, isn't it?
It's the elephant in the room every time. We can talk about fancy new biodetection tech or having these airtight response protocols.
And if people don't trust the message or the messenger,
Yeah,
game over.
exactly. And it's not just about like blind faith in government agencies either. CBRN World brought up this UNICEF report. Vaccination rates are plummeting globally. And that's been a trend for decades, by the way, not some new phenomenon.
It's like if we can't even get people on board with vaccines, something that's been studied and proven for, what, a century? Imagine trying to get that same level of buy-in during a radiation incident or a bio-attack where the information is evolving by the minute.
Think back to those early days of the pandemic. Remember shelter in place?
Oh, yeah.
Those announcements only worked if people, one, understood the threat was real, and two, actually believed that holing up in their homes was the best course of action. Trust, or at least some semblance of it, is crucial in those moments.
Because you can have the most well-intentioned public health message in the world, but it's amazing how quickly it becomes that old adage.
Ugh.
You can lead a horse to water.
You absolutely cannot force people to trust you. Not in this day and age where everyone's got a supercomputer in their pocket and access to, well, let's just say, a wide range of information.
Speaking of which, gotta love the CBRNE World writers for sneaking this little gem in. Apparently, there's already conspiracy theory going around that this latest Mpox outbreak is, get this, a ploy to sabotage Trump in the upcoming election.
Oh, of course there is.
I mean, you gotta laugh, right?
In a dark humor kind of way, yeah. But it just goes to show how quickly misinformation can worm its way in, and how that can completely derail even the best laid response plans. Imagine you've got the CBRN incident unfolding, and there's conflicting information circulating about evacuation routes, about what to do if you've been exposed.
Not exactly a recipe for a calm, collected response.
Not at all. And sadly, history's given us some pretty stark examples of what happens when preparedness meets a lack of trust. CBRN World brought up the Goiânia incident in Brazil.
Oh, man. Back in the 80s, right?
Yeah, 1987. Abandoned radioactive material, a group of scavengers who stumble upon it, no idea what they're dealing with, and you had this perfect storm of chaos.
It always amazes me how something that happened back then can still feel so relevant today.
It's because, at its core, Goiânia wasn't just a failure of equipment or technology. It was a breakdown in communication, a lack of awareness, and a system that just wasn't equipped to handle that kind of invisible threat.
Which, oddly enough, CBRN World then connects to another incident you wouldn't necessarily think to compare it to, Fukushima. Obviously, completely different scales, different causes. One's a lost radiation source, the other's a nuclear meltdown triggered by a tsunami.
Right, but the parallels are fascinating when you really dig in.
The parallels are fascinating when you really dig in.
Totally. It's that same kind of cocktail safety measures that just weren't up to snuff, communication breakdowns up and down the line, and this mad scramble to contain the damage after it's already happened.
And with Fukushima, CBRN World went into this whole thing about how even just decontaminating the helicopters and vehicles turned into this logistical nightmare. I mean, can you imagine?
It's wild, right? You think about these major incidents and you picture like hazmat suits and Geiger counters.
Right.
But the logistics, the everyday stuff, that suddenly becomes incredibly complex.
It just shows that even with all the tech, all the planning, those human factors, those are the things that can really make or break the whole response.
No doubt. And a huge part of that,
Yeah.
trust. Plain and simple.
It's like we've said, you can have the shiniest new toys, the most cutting-edge protocols, but if you don't have trust, you're kind of dead in the water.
Exactly. And that trust, that's not something you can just magically create when disaster strikes. That's the groundwork you got to be laying right now, every single day.
So we've covered a lot of ground here with this CBRNA world issue.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a whirlwind, really.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got these incredible advancements like that PSAM mannequin they were talking about for hazmat suit testing,
Oh, yeah.
straight out of science fiction. And then you've got companies like 908 Devices making these huge moves in the CBRN detection game.
Totally.
But
That-
there it is again.
There's always a but. Right.
Always.
Uh-huh.
It's like we haven't quite figured out the human side of the equation.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have the tools, the knowledge,
But putting it all into practice when it really counts, that's the real challenge.
and that's what we keep coming back to, isn't it? That human element, being able to communicate clearly, work together when it matters most, trusting the experts in each other.
Couldn't have stuck it better myself.
Because at the end of the day, these CDRN threats, they're not just about, viruses and radiation. They're about us. They expose the gaps in our systems, in how we talk to each other, and how we build trust as a society.
And those gaps, they have very real consequences.
So if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive, it's that this isn't just about, governments or scientists. It's about all of us. We all have a role to play in building a safer, more resilient future.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort all the way.
And that might sound a little bit, cheesy or idealistic, but the alternative is, well, pretty grim, right? So let's keep having these conversations. Let's keep asking the tough questions, and maybe we can start to bridge those gaps and get ahead of the next crisis before it's too late.